On the eve of this tragedy that was about to occur, I would say that she had a ton of friends, she had no enemies, and she was perfectly satisfied with her position in life. And nobody could have anticipated what was about to happen to her. The day started just like all the days for her. She drove across town of a morning and went to class all day. She was expecting a very difficult exam the next day and spent all of her spare time on the campus studying for that exam. And then she came back home and she had dinner with her parents. And over dinner, she told them she had to go back to the campus to get ready for that exam tomorrow. Anne said, "I'll be back home at 11 o'clock. She found 3 girls in the dorm, and they went to a study hall in the dorm. She didn't leave until midnight. She did have some contact with a male student friend of hers after she got in her car. She got in her car that was parked in one of those driveways on the campus across Broadway from Ford Hall. And he drove up beside of her and they chatted for just a few minutes and then kind of left in their cars bumper to bumper. He only drove about maybe a block and a half and went into a parking lot beside of a men's dorm where he lived. And so he then went into that dorm, but he saw her car going south on Upper Street, and that would have taken her home in about 15 minutes. At 11 o'clock, her mother got concerned about her. Then she got really upset around midnight, and so she came to the campus looking for her car. And she did that twice. Went all around the campus. She went to that dorm. The dorm was locked and dark. She did that until 2:30 in the morning. At 2:30, she got Betty Gail's father out of bed, and they called the police. And the police put out the all points bulletin announcing that there was a missing student, given the car and the description of the girl and the driver's license on the car. And all of the police who were on duty started looking for the car. A police officer who was patrolling over near the campus, he saw a car fitting this description. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. He saw it sitting up that main driveway there in front of Morrison Hall, and he could see from the road, from the street where he was, looked like there was one person in it, a driver. And so he went up there, and he was the first person to discover her in the car. And what he saw was a teenage-looking girl. She was sitting in the car under the steering wheel with her feet on the floorboard. Her head was back over the back of the front seat. She had a brassiere around her neck, and she was obviously dead.
Professor Lawson, it's good to see you again.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
I haven't seen you since the Kentucky Humanities Kentucky Book Fair a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
For you and for the University Press of Kentucky. This story started a long time ago. So tell me about what you began to learn. First, what you learned in 1961. You were still in law school, but what you remember about Betty Gail Brown, how she was portrayed, and then what you learned about her when you started working on the case.
I had just come to University of Kentucky to go to law school. And of course, you know what the newspapers were like in those days. They went crazy over it. And so I got intensely interested in it when I was a student, as did almost every law student that was in the law school at that time. She was a college student. She was in her second year of college over at Transylvania. She had spent all of her life here in Lexington, although a very short one because of this tragedy.
She was how old when she was killed?
She was 19 and a half. When she was killed, she was in the beginning of her second year of college. Now, she had gone to public schools here in Lexington. She was the only child of 2 parents that she had an unbelievably close relationship to, particularly her mother. She had a very close relationship with her mother. They lived on the other side of town from Transylvania. She was very active in campus activities. She drove across town every day from home and back home that night, and she had lots and lots of friends on the campus, male and female, and every one of them described her as a very likable, nice, friendly person. And as far as I could ever tell in looking at it, she didn't have an enemy.
She was studying with some friends was it in the dormitory?
Yes.
And is that dormitory still in existence?
Still there, Forer Hall.
Oh.
It's right on Broadway now, right straight across from the center of the campus at Transy. Now she left home about 7 and got to that dorm about 7:15. That's about how long it took her to get across town. She had planned to leave the dorm at about 11, but she found the house mother sometime before that and got permission to stay longer, and so she didn't leave until midnight. And she left. The house mother let her out of the dormitory.
Where did the male friend see her? In the parking lot?
They were in a driveway that was across from Forer Hall, and this student saw her heading down a street. It was upper, heading toward home, and he saw her at 12 o'clock, and she had been home in 15 minutes. She didn't get there. They never saw her after. This was the last person to see her alive.
All right, this will be my first directed question to you on your opinion. What's your speculation on, from the time the male friend saw her leave that area where they were in conversation and drive down upper, he went to his dorm, and then she was found in the circular drive in front of the auditorium, in front of the hall. What happened?
Well, I think before I answer that question, I ought to tell you the second piece of this story, and that is the Alex Arnold confession. They investigated this case like crazy for all the way until the end of 1961. They had 25 police officers working around the clock on it. The best detectives in the police department, and all the help they could possibly need. At the end of that year, they were in total darkness as to two things. They had no idea as to motive. There was never any motive. Now, they started out because of what they found at the scene, that the murder might have been a part of a sexual event. She was strangled with her own bra. When they got in the car, they saw that the top two buttons on her blouse were unbuttoned. She didn't have a bra on, so they concluded early on, okay, she was strangled with her own bra, and it was part of a sexual event. But almost instantly after that, that thought withered away, because they found that all of the rest of her clothing were undisturbed. As got reported in the paper the next day, neat and in perfect array. Now, the autopsy convinced the police that she had not been involved in sexual activity, because she was in her menstrual period.
Okay.
And she had a tampon. You know, in the investigation, the police, the investigators, got a diary that she had kept. And they didn't get the diary. I mean, the mother gave them the names of all of the people she had dated while she was on the Transy campus. And there was a pretty significant number of those, and the police interrogated all of them, and they gave polygraph examinations to several of them, and they ended up with nothing out of that. And so they chased down every single lead that they could find, every rumor, every tip, going all the way through that year. So 12 weeks of around the clock, very aggressive investigation, and ended up in darkness. I mean, they had no idea as to who it might have been or why it had occurred. Now, they continued the investigation pretty aggressively through 1962. They did all kinds of things. You know, they went to Michigan to interview a student who'd quit school the day after Betty died. They went to Atlanta, Georgia to interview an employee who had abruptly left. They went to New York and interviewed a graduate of the college who was up there wearing women's clothing, and he had a year after the homicide, killing, he was found in possession of a big, thick stack of newspaper articles about it, and that caused them to get suspicious of him. They chased all kinds of things like that down all through 1962. And then it sort of, they lost their, not interest, but they just didn't have much hope after that.
No leads.
The leads are all gone, the rumors were withering away, and so it became a cold case, I would say, at the beginning of 63 and 64. And then, at the beginning of 1965, the other character in this story, Alex Arnold Jr., stepped into the picture and took an action that revived the whole thing and probably made it hotter than it had ever been because of the nature of what he said. But
you had joined a law firm in Lexington at that time?
I had. I'd been in the firm for about 2 years when this case was tried, and I'd done a lot of work with the lawyer who was first appointed to defend him. His name was Amos Eblin, and in 1965, I would say he was probably the most highly respected lawyer in the state of Kentucky, and they wanted somebody like that in this case because of the publicity that the case had and was going to get. And so when he was asked to do this, he came and asked me if I would help him and got me appointed as co-counsel, so the two of us. But he was the one that they selected originally because he had the reputation for it, and I was a beginner. This occurred all the way across the country in a little town called Klamath Falls, Oregon. Alex Arnold Jr. had all kinds of roots in Kentucky, more Lexington than any place else, but not just that. I would call him an occupant rather than a resident of Klamath Falls because he had made his way out there in a very unusual way. He had no money, he had no car, he had no job. He's sleeping on the streets. On this day, in January of 1965, he started drinking. When he got up, he got in trouble that day with the police and got arrested for disorderly conduct and public intoxication. And he was taken promptly to a police court judge, and the police court judge found him guilty of public intoxication and fined him $25 for that intoxication. Well, he didn't have a nickel on him, and so they sent him to jail for 10 days to pay off the fine and the court costs. And he was fined in the jail for a couple of days. And then that all occurred on a Saturday. On Monday, he started seeing things on the wall, creatures crawling on the wall of his cell. He started talking to the toilet paper in his cell. He was trying to deal with a mind-reading machine that was there. He was having delirium tremens. He'd been off alcohol for a couple of days. And so he then threatened to kill himself while he was in the jail. And so they set him off where they could watch him around the clock. And a day after that all started, he said to a jail employee, "I need to talk with somebody." And the jail employee said, "Okay, we'll talk." And he said, "No, I need to talk with a police officer. I've got to get something off my chest." And so he goes and gets a detective in the Klamath Falls Police Department to come to the jail, and he comes over there and he puts Alex Arnold and this detective together. And Arnold says, "Get me out of this cell away from this mind-reading machine." So he takes him to another part of the jail, and the detective said to him, "Well, I understand you need to talk with somebody." He said, "Yes, I've got to get something off my chest." The detective said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "I think I killed a woman back in Kentucky." And the detective said to him, "Well, when did you do that, and who did you kill?" He said, "Well, I don't know. It was 3 or 4 years ago. And it was Betty Gail Brown, who was a student." And the detective said to him, "Are you sure you killed her?" And he said, "I'm 99% sure I killed her." Well, from then on, the detective then, he had him examined by a physician, and that physician later became a witness for the prosecution in the case. This was a physician from the county health department there in Oregon, and he told the detective there's nothing wrong with him. I mean, he's sound mentally, he's sound physically, and so that's when the detective in Klamath Falls called Lexington and got the police from the Lexington Police Department involved in it, and within one day, they were in Klamath Falls, Oregon, and pulled Arnold out of the jail and started the interrogation of him that ended up producing the confession, which was the key to the trial. This was a handwritten confession written by the police officer, the detective who went out there, and given to Arnold after they interrogated him under the best circumstances. They provided every protection to which he was entitled, and they got this written confession from him that he signed under oath. Now, in this confession, he basically said that he'd been drunk all day. He was drunk at night, been drinking all day, drunk at midnight, and needed to go someplace to sleep it off. Said, I went up he was hanging around a place called Black Cup Restaurant Grill, which was down on Main and Broadway, right on that corner there, which was about 3 blocks from Transylvania. He said, I wanted to sleep it off at midnight, so I walked away from there and went up to Gratz Park. Now, when I got to Gratz Park, there were people there. I was going to sleep in Gratz Park, but there were people there, so I decided to walk across the street and go over to the campus. And I went over to the campus, and I found a place where I could sleep under some bushes, and I laid down and I went to sleep. I woke up from the cold at some point. Now, he said he had a half a bottle of wine, drank all of his wine, and then decided to go back where he'd been, which would have been back down on Broadway and Main. And as he was walking across the campus toward Main Street, he saw this car sitting in front of Morrison Hall in that driveway. And this is the thing that inflamed this case again. He said as he walked by, there were 2 girls in the car making love with each other, kissing and hugging each other. And he said, as I walked by, I asked them for a match. I wanted to smoke, I had cigarettes, but I had no matches. They started screaming at me. I walked on and they kept screaming at me, and I got mad. I went back, opened the door, grabbed the girl on the driver's side and slammed her head against the dashboard and knocked her out, and the other girl got out of the car and ran away. And I was scared I'd get caught, so I got in the car. There was a brassiere hanging over the back of the front seat, and I put it around her neck and I choked her to death. Then I went on, I locked the car doors and I went on down the street. In the trial of the case, when we were defending him, the prosecution pretty much ignored that part of the confession, and we introduced lots of evidence to show that she had never shown any interest in girls. And the last 2 witnesses of the trial was the mother and father of Betty Gail Brown. We put them on the witness stand to testify only to that they, she had never shown interest. She had boyfriends, both high school and college, and so I could never buy that part of his story.
Yeah.
I guess I always thought it had to be somebody connected to the college. Now, I don't know whether employee, whether student, or what, because she clearly left the campus in a car at 12 o'clock in the morning, and then they find her in the car at 3 o'clock. What is the likelihood, if it was a total stranger or somebody not connected to the college, that the car would have been brought back to the campus? And so I always had difficulty, figuring that out. Now, in terms of trying to defend our client, we didn't have to worry too much about that. We're basically saying he's given a confession here that is not reliable. And of course, we connected that up with a very serious alcohol problem that he had had for a period of 10 years by the time he got to Oregon and gave that confession.
How long did the trial last?
It lasted, I believe, 7 days, but now I'm guessing it might have been 6 days, but it was a pretty extensive trial. It was a trial about virtually nothing except the confession. When I first wrote this book, I gave some thought to naming it The Trial of a Confession. Now, the University Press didn't like that. They wanted Betty Gail Brown's name on it, so that's what it became. But it was a 7-day trial, and the whole thing focused totally on his confession and whether or not you could rely on his confession. From the time he came into this picture and gave the confession, he did not speak with certainty. He told the first detective that he talked to out there, "I'm 99% sure I killed her." Now, he stuck to that position, though, through most of our year while he was in jail, until right toward the end of it, he began to change and have doubts in his own mind about it. Now, the significance of that was that they had no evidence on, they were able to prove that he was in Lexington on the night of the killing. He was hanging around down there around that bar. But they had no other evidence to connect him to this murder other than his confession. And so at the trial of the case, we put him on the witness stand. And what he testified to on the witness stand was, "I don't believe I killed her, but I'm not absolutely sure of that." Now, that was his testimony in the trial of the case. The last conversation that I had with him, and it was while the jury was out. The jury was deliberating, and they deliberated all day. And they kept him in a little jail cell in the courthouse. And after 3 or 4 hours, I went over there just to see him and talk to him, see how he's doing and all that. And he, in the course of that, he asked me, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. It's a close case. It could go either way." And he said, "That's not what I mean. Do you think I killed her?" And I said, "Well, I don't know whether you did, and you seem not to know." And so in the end, the jury ended up hung. You had 7 of them voting to acquit him. You had 5 voting for conviction, and they never retried him after that. I'd say it was about halfway between the time he was brought back here and put in jail and the time of the trial. I was visiting with him in the jail, and he told me that Betty Gail Brown's mother has just visited me with the jail, and she told me I didn't kill their daughter. Now, I got real mad over that the jailers had let her in there to talk with him.
It seems a bit strange.
Well, I confronted them with it over it. I was real angry over that because it shouldn't have happened. Well, they couldn't find any evidence that it had happened. And then sometime after that, a lawyer about my age, she was in school with me, called me and said he wanted to come talk to me about the case. And he was representing the Browns, the mother and the father. They just wanted somebody to help them through all this. And he told me they don't believe Arnold killed her, and they want you all to know that. Now, after the trial was over and after the hung jury, they made a public statement to the press through this lawyer in which they basically told them that they were really pleased with the way the case was handled by both the prosecution and the defense. And they then made a statement, "We're going to continue to look for and try to figure out who murdered our daughter." So they didn't believe he did it. Now, I guess I have to think that the main motivating force there was his statement about her being there making love with another girl. Now, as I said to you earlier, homosexuality in 1961 was viewed differently than it is today. And so, you know, maybe that had more to do with it than anything else, but they very clearly did not think he was the one. Well, there was a very harmful, hurtful rumor that the mother had done it, and that lingered. It started on the campus over there, and it lingered for months and months. And I don't know, I found lots of information in the police records about that rumor. And the police dismissed every bit of her from day one, because, I mean, they would, if somebody came in with something, and they had both students and non-students coming in, and there was never any basis for any of it. And so they finally got tired of it. The mother was hurt badly by it. I have a segment in there where I describe a visit that she made with one of her close friends.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
lived out there on the same street, and Chief Hale was the chief of police then, and so the mother came into the police to talk to him about it and about the rumor and all, and they took her to Frankfurt, her and her husband to Frankfurt, to the best polygraph operator in the state. And he gave them polygraph examinations. They passed it with flying colors. And Chief Hale released all that, even the questions that was asked to her, got put in the press. And he basically said, this is a totally unfounded, hurtful rumor, and it needs to stop.
Yeah.
And it pretty much stopped after that. But there was one piece of the investigation that attracted more attention in 1961 than anything else. And it started with a waitress from a restaurant in the vicinity of Transylvania over there, where Transylvania students regularly went. About 2 days after the killing, she walks into the police station and she tells the police that she was a waitress at this restaurant. Now, Betty Gill's picture had been on the front page of the newspaper the day before. Her normal picture, and then they had a picture of her in the car with her bra around her neck.
Yeah.
And this waitress came to the police station. She says, I think I saw her in my restaurant at 1:30 in the morning, and she was with another girl. Now, that got blown up in the newspapers from the minute she showed up. I don't know who leaked it, but it got out quickly, and it became a headline that they're looking for this other girl.
Yeah.
Now, what the police did was they took this waitress to the morgue and let her see the body, and she said, that's her. That's who I saw. Let her see her clothing. Said, yeah, that's what she was wearing. And so they then took her undercover to the funeral. And this funeral drew hundreds and hundreds of people. Flooded out onto the street from the church. Church wouldn't hold them where they had this funeral. Now, these were largely students, high school and Transy students. And took her undercover, let her stay there and look at all those people. She couldn't identify the other girl. They then took her to the burial site. She still couldn't identify anybody. They took her over to this dormitory where Betty Gail had studied that night and let her see all of the females who lived in that dormitory. She still couldn't identify anybody. Then they took her and they showed her all of the pictures of every female student on the Transy campus. She couldn't identify anybody. Now, all of this, though, got blown up in the newspaper, explained in great detail, with one big headline saying, the police are ready to arrest another girl. Okay, now all of that was in the newspaper, and all of that was known to everybody. Now, I always thought that it's from that maybe where he gets this piece of his story
Yeah.
in which he says she was there with another girl making love.
Professor Lawson, if Arnold didn't kill Betty Gail Brown, who did?
There are no answers to any of that because of the gaps in the evidence and because they could never establish a motive for the killing of her. And without that motive, there's almost no way to determine. Now, the one possibility is, and it would have to be a very old person now, you know. I mean, we're now 56 or 57 years from the killing. Somebody may step forward one of these days and say, I did it. I don't know, but unless that happens, it's going to be an unsolved murder, I think.
It's a fascinating story.
Well, I've found it fascinating myself, the most fascinating thing I ever did in my professional life.
Well, thank you for talking with us again.
Okay, glad to do it.